Recapped here. Today I'm going to show you an American erotic thriller film called The Crush. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. 28-year-old writer Nick Elliott secured a job at Peak magazine and was in search of a nice quiet place to write, lodging in a guest house belonging to Cliff and Liv Forrester. Nick is seen driving them towards the house and he almost hits 14-year-old Adrienne Forrester, a pretty girl who was rollerblading on the street. Liv Forrester is more than happy to show him the guest house, saying she and her husband Cliff are gone most of the time and they would feel better if there was someone around the house. Nick hears the piano and Liz tells him it's her daughter Adrienne who's playing. As Nick gets settled in the guest house, Adrienne watches him hidden and her friend Cheyenne joins her and asks to know what was going on. Adrienne replied that her parents had rented the guest house out to some guy. Nick peeks through the window to see Adrienne hiding after he had a brief conversation with Cheyenne, who Adrienne sent to go check him out. Nick goes to work late and enters the meeting room. Amy, a coworker, asks him if he's new around here, to which he replies, yes. Michael, Nick's boss, comes into the room and reprimanded Nick for being late. He acknowledged the fact that Nick was also recommended by his former employers as a researcher with only fair writing skills. With that, he asks Nick to research and writes an article about Robert Levinsky, a man who has embezzled $2 billion. Amy is also assigned to track Nick and take pictures if they find anything. The handsome Nick soon becomes acquainted with and frequently visited by the couple's 14-year-old daughter Adrienne. That night, Adrienne shows up at the house while Nick is working. Nick invites her inside and Adrienne asks to know what Nick is working on. Nick asks her if she's heard of Robert Levinsky and Adrienne tells him that he is the arbitrage guy who stole a lot of money. Nick tells Adrienne what he's learned about Robert so far. Adrienne gets a seat and makes herself more comfortable, and Nick is starting to feel uncomfortable with Adrienne's closeness. They talk more about Levinsky and Adrienne gets excited. She comes up with the theory that the money is probably being hidden in a Swiss account somewhere. Meanwhile, Adrienne takes up his tobacco and Nick asks her again if she's really just 14, to which she replies, I'm almost turning 15, and puffs the smoke. Taking the tobacco back, Nick asks the young girl if it's past her bedtime, to which she replies, yes. She stands up and eventually leaves the guest house. One day, as Nick was taking a bath, Adrienne shows up at the guest house again, uninvited, and picks up a picture of Nick and his grandfather, and asks him if she can have eyed, to which Nick replies no, as it is the only one he has. She peeks inside the bathroom while Nick is dressing up and puts the picture back on the table. Once Nick is done, she hands him a pair of sunglasses, which he appreciated. Adrienne invites Nick to a party that her parents are throwing at their house. Without confirming that he will attend, Nick decides to stop in. On his way to the office, Nick realizes that there is something wrong with the article he wrote about Robert Levinsky, but before he could go over the article again, Michael requests for it. Michael praises the article, assuring him that the editors haven't touched it. Together with the photographs that Amy took, Michael asks his assistant to take them to the art section. Michael praises Nick again, calling his research excellent and text clean. He even commends him for having some style. Confused, Nick just thanks his boss. Once home, Nick decides to go to the party Adrienne invited him to. As he enters the house, Nick is taken by Adrienne's impressive piano performance. Nick follows Adrienne to her parents' outdoor balcony afterward. He begins mentioning that if she were just 10 years older, as she flirtatiously interrupts him, questioning what he'd do. Redirecting the conversation, Adrienne suddenly encourages Nick to take her for a ride in his convertible. Nick agrees to take Adrienne on a nighttime drive to a place she chooses. She leads him to a romantic, secluded area where she attempts to seductively kiss him. Though initially receptive to the kiss, Nick stops when he realizes he is being seduced. Without leading her on, Nick takes Adrienne home. Adrienne goes to sleep that night, smiling and thinking of their kiss. After some time, Nick is having some barbecue with Amy and some other guests when Michael visits him with the news that Levinsky wants to speak to him. Michael informs Nick that he would be setting up an exclusive meeting where Levinsky wants to make him part of the deal. Michael guesses that Levinsky saw something in the article that impressed him and gives Nick a bottle of wine. Amy heads into the orchard to look for more sticks for the marshmallows, where she notices a wasp hive that causes her to tread more carefully. Adrienne shows up from nowhere and scares Amy. She tells Adrienne about the bee's nest, but Adrienne only corrects her saying that they are just wasps. Looking at Amy coldly, Adrian instructs her to leave. Together, they walk back to Nick's party where they see Nick talking to a beautiful girl. Adrian compliments the girl and tells Amy not to worry, since some guys really like girls with small chests. Offended, Amy leaves her. Later, Amy asks Nick what the problem with Adrian was, and Nick replies that they were getting along fine. Amy tells Nick that Adrian has a crush on him, which he brushes off. He plays messages on his phone, and one from Adrian which says she's thinking about him and wants him to call her. Amy admits that Adrian is giving her the creeps, and she reminds Nick that he needs to be the adult here and not blur the lines. Adrian's crush on Nick intensifies, but he quickly wises up and attempts to put her off, having begun a budding romance with coworker Amy. Adrian continues to boldly pursue him. One day she calls him while working and begins to make small talk, playfully telling him that she started her period. While talking, Nick asks Adrian if she took his picture with his grandfather, and Adrian denies it, asking him why she would do that. Not so sure that Adrian is telling the truth, he ends the call and goes to Adrian's house to look for her. When he doesn't see her, he starts wandering inside and finds Adrian's room. He looks around at her pictures, and in the bed, finds a love-shaped pillow with both of their initials embroidered on it. Nick hears the sound of running water and notices that Adrian is getting ready to take a shower. Not knowing what to do, Nick quickly hides in the closet. Adrian starts undressing, and when she realizes that Nick was hiding in her wardrobe, she finishes taking off her clothes before finally facing his way with her whole body exposed. When Nick continues to rebuff her advances, Adrian's actions become destructive. She steals, defaces a car he's restored, and erases his computer disks. Yet, he's unable to convince her parents of her guilt. He ignores Adrian for the next few days as he painstakingly tries to write his articles back. Adrian's behavior becomes more obsessive and destructive as her infatuation with Nick continues to increase. After Adrian spies on Nick in bed with Amy, she locks Amy into her dark room and empties a wasp's nest into the vents, exploiting Amy's spexophobia. Amy survives, and Nick, now convinced that Adrian is big trouble. Cheyenne, a friend of Adrian's, tries to warn Nick about her, but she has an accident at the riding school she and Adrian attend together when Adrian sabotages the saddle on her horse. He attempts to find new lodging. However, Adrian accuses him of sexually assaulting her with evidence obtained from a used condom from Nick's trash, leading to the police arresting him. After Michael bails him out and suspends him until trial, Cheyenne informs Nick that she knows he is innocent and that Adrian has an extensive history of obsessive behavior, citing a previous crush on a camp counselor named Rick who accidentally died from eating something poisonous. Cheyenne also informs Nick of a diary Adrian kept that can exonerate him. After Cheyenne departs, Nick hears strange noises coming from the Forrester's house. In Adrian's room, Nick sees her bed filled with lit-up candles, apology letters, and pictures of him and his grandfather defaced. Adrian then shows up in the doorway holding a wooden tool while crying, and when Nick asks her where Cheyenne is, Adrian only gets more upset. He ignores her and continues to investigate. While walking down the hallway, Adrian starts to hit Nick with a wooden stick, but before he could fight back, Adrian manages to push him off the wooden rail. Before she could hit him again, her father comes back home and she rushes off. Nick manages to get up and go to the attic, where he finds Cheyenne bound and gagged on the carousel in the attic. Meanwhile, Cliff manages to break into the house, and while Nick tries to free Cheyenne, Adrian confronts and attacks him again. Nick attempts to subdue Adrian, and when Cliff arrives, he tackles Nick after he mistakes him for the aggressor. Adrian then knocks Cliff unconscious when she furiously orders him to leave Nick alone, and she's still infatuated with him. Nick goes back to trying to help Cheyenne, and when Adrian tries to stop him again, he subdues her with one punch, knocking her unconscious. Acquitted, in Seattle, Nick goes to live with Amy while Adrian is confined to a psychiatric hospital in Spanaway. Though she laments that Nick refuses to speak to her, respond to the multiple letters she continues to send him, or accept her apologies, her doctor comments that she is making good progress before reminding her to attend her afternoon session, unaware that she is now developing a crush on him. Meanwhile, Amy brings the letters from Adrian to Nick, and he's surprised to see how many they are. In the final scene, Adrian returns to her locked room in the psychiatric hospital, where she evilly glares at a photo of the doctor and his wife before her mouth slowly curves into a smile.